Hey everybody, what's going on? Welcome back to the Restaurant Growth Podcast presented by 7 Shifts. This week on the show, we're chatting all things labor productivity with Jim Taylor, founder of BenchmarkSixty. Jim is an industry vet who spent 13 years with the Cactus Club Cafe all throughout Canada, and now he's helping restaurateurs take control of their labor costs. We get into why it's not enough to just measure labor as a percentage of sales, and the whys and hows into measuring labor productivity. It's something both Jim and our team at 7 Shifts are believers in, and I hope you can take some of Jim's advice back to your restaurant and make some impactful changes. So I won't keep you waiting any longer. Here's our full conversation. Hey Jim, how's it going today?
Good. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So Jim Taylor, founder, BenchmarkSixty. You can do it more justice than I can. So tell us a little bit about yourself. How'd you get started in the restaurant industry?
I started in the restaurant industry when I was in high school. That typical way to get into the restaurant, right? You've got a buddy or a friend or someone who's working in a restaurant and says you should come and work there. So I started doing it because I wanted to try to make some tips and just have some fun, right? So who knew it was going to turn into a whole career?
Absolutely. And where'd you start out at?
I started at a restaurant called Earl's in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. They're a pretty big company now. They're all over Canada and the US, but yeah, they were just a little spot then.
Nice.
That's where I got to start.
And were you a dishwasher, server?
I did a little bit of everything. I did some dishwashing. I was an expediter. I was a busboy. I was working at the front door. They wouldn't let me be a server. I wasn't old enough. I was only 17. So I worked my way up.
Nice. And you worked way up, and I guess your career. So I know you spent a number of years at Cactus Club Cafe. Talk me through that. What was that experience like? What was your role? And how did the industry evolve while you were there?
Yeah, it changed a ton. I had a really cool, really good experience with them. I was with Cactus Club for right around 20 years, actually.
Wow.
It was one of my, early on restaurant jobs, just early in university and just kind of continued to work through pretty much every front of house position you can kind of accomplish and take on there.
Yeah.
So I worked with them right through, university. I did a whole bunch of other education kind of as I went. I moved around all over the country, opening new locations, took on a whole bunch of different things. But, that company was growing and they were a really innovative company. So, we were kind of at the tip of the Canadian, restaurant industry. And when it came to innovation in terms of food and concept and those kinds of things. So they're definitely a leader in the market. I was pretty lucky to have worked with them for as long as I did.
And what was your ultimate role there? Were you in the corporate office?
Yeah. So for about 10 years, I was doing executive regional management. I was working with profit teams and finance on different strategies and ways to sort of continue to battle what was happening with just how the entire profit model with restaurants operates, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in Canada, minimum wage is $15 an hour and there's no tip wage. So,
right.
If you're a server making $300 on a Friday night, you still make $15 an hour. So
right.
As that was going, as wages were climbing in the early, 2015, 2016, we had to totally recreate the entire profit model because, we were seeing 30, 40% increases in wages.
Wow.
It's just crazy. And everyone in the market was seeing it and it either forced people to change or, some of them didn't make it. Right. So it was an interesting, very educational time to kind of go through that transition in the industry in terms of how wages were being paid.
What were the major takeaways and the major learnings for you? So what was it before,
Sure.
and as you're in that role, how did it change and how did you adapt and eventually succeed in that changing market?
Well, I consider myself really lucky because I was overseeing the part of the business that was going to see that spike first. So I was kind of a guinea pig, to be honest. I was sort of thrown to the wolves, so to speak, in terms of we were paying $10 an hour and we were given 24 months notice before wages were going to be $15 an hour. So we were going to see a 50% increase in wages over 2 years.
Right.
And it really made us realize that the current profit model, the current way that restaurants operate, where they're constantly just trying to cut to hit targets. Yep. They're trying to work harder. They're trying to work longer. They're trying to work split shifts and all these different things in order to hit that labor target. It just wasn't going to work anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And we really realized that, it was things like turnover cost. It was things like training. It was things like, these different parts of the labor model that no one really spends all that much time thinking about. Those are some of the biggest areas of opportunity.
Yeah.
And we found that the concept of how productive the team was, not individually, not how hard people work, but actually the whole business, how productive and fluid the business was, and trying to find ways to take better care of our staff, keep people around longer, reduce turnover, those types of things were where the big opportunity was. But we actually were, it was a pretty cool learning curve and learning experience for me because, being at the front of it, it was about a 2-year sort of project and case study that taught me probably more about restaurant management than I'd ever learned.
And when you talk about the traditional labor model, is that kind of just saying like, all right, well, my labor cost, like almost an arbitrary number, I have to keep my labor cost percentage below this and I'm good. And then that never, do you find that, of course you were finding that wasn't going to work anymore, but a lot of the industry still operates that way with that number in their head. So I guess that kind of takes us a little bit to what you're doing now. So from Cactus Club Cafe to BenchmarkSixty. So talk about that transition and what you're doing today.
Yes. So the first thing it's funny. I think most restaurants operate in something like this. They're given a target by somebody that is a percentage of sales, right?
Yeah.
And they say, hit this labor target. Same thing with food costs and those other things, right? But we're talking about labor. So they come into the beginning of the week. They hope that Monday is busy. If they see the report on Tuesday and the percentage was higher than what they wanted it to be for Monday, they cut harder on Tuesday.
Right.
If it comes in high again on Tuesday, they cut harder on Wednesday. And typically there's some sort of conversation about, let's hope the weekend's busy to bring that number back in line.
Right.
Right. And it's sort of this constant, churn of chasing a percentage that there are so many variables involved in that the management, we did a case study on this when we were doing this project with Cactus, where we looked at every shift across 30 restaurants for 2 years.
Wow.
So, I can't even remember the number of actual shifts that was, but it's a lot, right?
Yeah.
And we looked at what the target was. And on any given day, front of house or back of house, if the manager or sous chef actually hit their target on any given day, and it was less than 10% of the shifts, they actually achieved their target. That's crazy, right? And so, it took us down a bunch of rabbit holes around HR and how people manage stress when it comes to hitting targets and all those other things. But it was wild how rarely they actually hit the target. Sometimes by the end of the week, it came in line. Sometimes by the end of the month, it came in line on the P&L. But the day-to-day fluctuation was crazy. So, your question about BenchmarkSixty, that's what we focus on now. Is we're a data coaching service. We teach restaurant operators how to use information to their advantage so they can set better targets, so they can have better measurement and metrics, so that they can leverage information and negate rising costs and remain profitable as these crazy, increases in wages and oil and beef and all these things are happening.
Do you feel that just like that labor cost as a percentage of sales, does that have any room in the industry? Maybe for a small single location, that might be something worth doing. But once you get to those multi-unit brands, do you just think it's not worth tracking or not worth using as a benchmark for yourself?
It's a result. It's not a strategy. So, we talk about that a lot, that it's a result, it's not a strategy. It's always going to show up on the P&L. The bank is always going to look at percentages, right? That's how we come to the profit number at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But just saying to a manager or a chef, you've got 10% labor costs, go out and hit it. It's almost impossible.
Yeah.
If you consider the variables, how much people are getting paid, how the customer behaves, or, customer spend. I use the term customer behavior because it's actually how they're behaving, not how we are.
Right.
But wage structure, menu pricing, customer behavior, weather, time of year, special occasions, all those different, there's so many factors that go into that percentage at the end of the day. And unfortunately, part of the study that we did, it showed that the managers are under stress to hit these numbers. So they actually cut harder in so many scenarios, which is at the detriment. It actually hurts the business because they're cutting harder. Now they're running short staff. Now their team doesn't have a chance to get to the customer to even sell anything, meaning it hurts the average customer spend and therefore hurts the percentage, right? It's this sort of vicious cycle. Yeah. So I believe that the metric or the percentage belongs in the industry as a
Sure.
part of the P&L, but it definitely shouldn't be part of the strategy.
Because there's too many variables going into actually trying to hit that number. And then I feel
Right.
like probably what ends up happening most of all is managers overcut because they're stressed about hitting the number. So they're stressed about that. And then they end up overworking themselves to make up for it, which stresses them out and makes them probably leave or quit
Yep.
a lot faster than they wanted to. And then the customer experience from that point is not as good as it can be because you don't have people that
Right.
are happy to be at work and not stressed. And then there goes your profit from there. So it, like you said, it's a vicious cycle. So instead of tracking you using labor costs as that target, you're a proponent of labor productivity. So how productive your workers are. What does that mean in the sense of a restaurant where maybe in a factory, it's like, well, they're installing, 20 more parts an hour than they were because of some good training or something like that. But the restaurant industry, like you said, has so many variables. So how do you define and then measure labor productivity in the restaurant industry?
Well, to your comment about the factory thing, everybody first thinks that restaurants are a service business, right? Which they very much are, but they're definitely very much a production business too.
Yeah.
Right. Kitchens are definitely based on production, but front of houses, you can apply the same types of measurements to front of house too. So if a quick sort of scenario here, let's say that you're DJ, the restaurant owner,
right,
and you own a little 20-seat restaurant. Okay. If I told you that we had a crystal ball and you knew that today from open to close, you're only going to serve 20 customers all day from open to close, you'd probably do that by yourself. Right. You probably cook their food. You probably bring their drinks. You probably bring them their check. You do it all on your own. If you're going to serve 100 customers tomorrow, you might think about it a little bit differently. You might say, okay, I need someone to cook the food and I need somebody to seat them maybe or help clean it.
Yeah.
If the third day you're going to serve 400 customers, all of a sudden you're going to go, okay, hold on a second. I need a whole team of people because 2 or 3 of us can't serve 400 people on our own. That'd be really stressful. The customer experience would be really bad. You would think about it in terms of that. But what if I, again, looked in that crystal ball and said, well, only 20 of those 400 people, so 380 of them aren't going to spend anything. They're just going to come in and order water. You can't control if they're going to order a water or a filet mignon or who knows what, right? So it's really not about sales at the end of the day. It's actually managing labor cost is actually about customer experience. And staff experience. It's actually about the interaction and the relationship between customers and staff. So how we work with our customers or our clients or the restaurant groups that we work with is educating them on how the information and the data available will show them what's happening with the customer to staff relationship. If we can measure that, if you think about it, if you were going to have one staff member working, serve 10 customers, right? There's a sale that would be generated. There's a labor cost that would be generated. What if they serve 10.5 customers? What if they served 11 customers or 11.5 customers? Then what happens if you need a second staff member? What's the threshold? At what point do you need a second staff member? We can use the data available to help them make better decisions around it, rather than saying, how do I use half a person to serve 10 customers?
Right.
Eventually you get to the point where you can't do it with less people.
Of course.
Right. But the industry is notorious for trying to be as efficient as possible. And efficiency is about doing more with less. So that scenario around not being able to control how much the customer spends, that's where we think the biggest opportunity lies in our industry, is about looking at it more from a people to people output. How much productivity does the business generate? Because in that way, it's just like a factory.
So do you measure like sales per labor hour, or are you looking more at like actual one-to-one interactions? How many customers can someone serve regardless of what they order? Is that how you're looking at it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think in the back of house, the actual sales per hour worked is a very, very good measure, because it actually is about how much food can one person produce. Right. But if you think about that sales per work hour in the front of house, if you're a server in a restaurant and I'm also a server in the same restaurant, and we have side-by-side sections. If you get sat a customer who's celebrating and they order steaks and wine and, high ticket items, and I'm serving a family with little kids that order chicken strips,
Right.
We have no control over that, but I served $20 a customer and you served 60. So that's, my argument is that the sales per front of house hour worked is not a great measurement because it does the same thing that labor cost percentage is doing.
Because at the end of the day, the amount of energy and effort it takes kind of probably evens out with those two things.
Right. So that's, some would argue that it takes more energy to serve the family, right? But that's fine. That's neither here nor there.
Right. Well,
we still need those customers.
Depends on how rowdy the celebrating customers are too. You never know.
That's true. Yeah. How much wine are they drinking?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So measuring that labor productivity, what data do you use then to measure that? Is it just number of customers served?
That's one of them. Yeah.
Okay.
So we put basically 4 core pieces of data together, in a way that helps us measure that. And really all that is the items that come together to create sales and labor costs. So it's average customer spend, the number of customers that you're serving, the average wage that you pay your staff, and the number of hours that you're using to schedule. Really, it's, quite simple. It's not anything that a restaurant operator wouldn't already look at. It's just how we put that information together that gives us a measurement. And once we measure that, we can leverage it.
Once you're there and once you have that labor productivity measured and you know what you're getting out of each of your staff members, I guess what's the next step from there to kind of keeping those labor costs under control? Is it about cutting staff or is it about training? And where can you make up the difference and increase the productivity, if you will? Because I'd be willing to wager everyone could probably do to increase it a little bit.
Right. So in terms of being willing to wager, that's an interesting conversation that comes up a lot because a lot of our clients will say, hey, well, this restaurant in our group is not working well. Let's start there. But this one we think is fine. So let's not touch it. And I've never, we worked with well over 100 different restaurants last year alone. I've never seen a restaurant that couldn't stand to have even a 5% improvement in productivity. And to give you some perspective, if a restaurant does $3 million a year in revenue, a 5% improvement in productivity will give them somewhere between $80,000 and $100,000 in opportunity.
Wow.
So I don't use the term savings because it's not direct savings. It doesn't all go to the bottom line, but opportunity is where that sort of falls. So, it's what we would do is we would sort of go in and we would say, okay, here's how we determine a benchmark. Here's how we, no pun intended, here's how we determine sort of the target. And then that 5% number, our goal is to find a 5% improvement in every restaurant that we work with. And what that usually ends up looking like is a combination of better staff experience, meaning their training is probably better. The turnover is lowered. The overall employee experience is improved and there is financial savings there. There's a direct correlation, right? If your training cost comes down and your turnover lowers, you're going to save money.
Right.
There is a direct correlation between improved productivity and increased revenue. So like I said, the productivity metric or that measurement is based on the relationship between the number of customers you serve and the number of staff you have working. So if you serve more customers, your revenue will go up. Right. And so how we would help to leverage that is every restaurant has 1,000 different strategies that they're working on all the time. Right. They're working on how quickly do you flip a table? How do you generate a quote time at the front door? How quickly do you, how long does it take French fries to cook? All of those things. There's a list of 1 million of those things.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about that is that restaurants typically don't have a way to measure if they work on those, what happens, right? They would hope likely that sales would go up, or they would hope likely that labor costs would come down, but there isn't really a direct measurement. And that's where the measurement around productivity comes in. If you increase the number of customers you serve by not losing customers at the door, by flipping tables quicker, whatever those things might be that you're working on, and you don't use more staff to serve those same customers, your productivity goes up. And if that happens, we can predict incredibly accurately. We can predict exactly what will happen to your labor cost.
Right. Because you know what you're getting from the people that you have.
Right.
And then you can continue. Sorry.
Yeah, no. You're totally right. And we can reverse engineer that data because we know based on wage structure, menu pricing, all of the data that we look at, we know that a certain level of output or productivity in a certain restaurant will give us a certain labor cost. So as the productivity goes up, we know what will happen with the labor cost, exactly what will happen, not what we hope will happen. We know
Right.
exactly what will happen. And so we use that a lot to reverse engineer targets for restaurant groups too, where we can say, okay, you're currently here. If you want to see a lower labor cost on your P&L, here's how to achieve that. Don't just go and tell your team to cut harder.
Mm. Yeah.
Which right now is happening a lot as wages go up and profit margins are shrinking.
Or people are working harder to kind of make up for that too. And going into the employee experience, this impacts your bottom line, but it also
Yeah.
really does have a big impact on the employee experience as well. They're not in fear of being cut as often, or they know what hours they're going to get because the business knows what they're capable of.
Well, that's part of it. So, there are lots of restaurants that we've worked with that have actually taken the data that we've sort of educated them on how to understand, and they'll go and start guaranteeing their staff certain hours because they know better what they can afford. But where the real benefit comes from in terms of employee experience is actually in stress level,
Yep.
on shift stress level. So as you can imagine, if you've got thinking back to that factory example, if the conveyor belt that's bringing all of the product through your station when you work in a factory starts to speed up, eventually you can't handle that workload anymore, right? You start to miss things.
Right.
It's going too fast. There's product getting past you. I mean, imagine, you think about that. You're putting lids on something or whatever it might be, right?
Right.
Eventually the workload gets too much that you can't handle it.
Mm.
Well, the same thing happens in a restaurant, right? If a server or a bartender or someone in a kitchen is working in their station and it gets too busy, eventually they can't handle that anymore. And they miss sales opportunities, they miss interaction opportunities, they miss quality. The workload is too high that the stress level becomes, too much. And often they quit, right?
Yeah.
And so that's part of the turnover issue that exists in restaurants. So when we have set a productivity target for a restaurant, we know that if we see that information come in the next day or the next week, if that number is too high, it means that the staff, their workload was too much.
Mm.
They couldn't handle what was going on. So go back and check your team because there's a good chance they didn't have a good experience that day.
And it also gives you like a real way to measure how much they're doing as well. Because if you're not measuring productivity in that way, you don't really know. You only can go on based on what they're saying. Well, I was working too much, or there were too many tables. It's like, well, you don't really have a way to see that. So this kind of gives you an opportunity to make sure everyone's kind of working as much as they can be, but not a second or an ounce harder than they need to
exactly.
be.
It's about setting the optimal output product and productivity number and then achieving that. And we can chop that information up in an almost endless number of ways.
Yeah.
So an example is we were working with a restaurant last month that was having some challenges with their labor costs. They wanted to find ways to hit this target, and is it still achievable based on what we have to pay our people now and what our pricing looks like and all these different things. And so we did a bit of a project with them and actually determined that they were losing productivity most in their expediter and food runner positions on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday nights specifically. So rather than the GM just telling his team or her team, cut harder, we're not hitting our target, we were able to take them and say Tuesday, Wednesday, or whatever. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, I think it was.
Yeah.
These are the specific nights that you need to address this position. Right. And so they were able to go back with their team, work on the Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday nights with the people in those roles, improve the productivity, and their labor target wasn't an issue to achieve anymore. So we can really look at that information in lots of different ways and really find out exactly where the issue is.
And I remember, employee experience, of course, stress, and has to also do with the amount of money they're taking home. My last question here, you wrote on LinkedIn a week or two ago, I think, about, wages are going up. Restaurateurs, I can't afford to pay that. But you said, a 1% increase in productivity can equal 50 cents wage.
Right.
Did I get that right?
Yeah, it was it's a 2% improvement in productivity will negate a 50 cent increase in wages.
What goes into making a 2%, say, increase in productivity?
Well, it depends on the restaurant, but so I always sort of the baseline model that we use quite often is that if a restaurant does around $3 million a year in revenue and they're sort of in that $30 average spend range, right? Your typical casual restaurant is somewhere usually between $20 and $30. So a 5% improvement in productivity in one of those restaurants, which would negate way more than a 50 cent increase in wages. Typically that's, if you can serve 4 more customers a day, it would do that for you. It would accomplish that.
4 more customers a day per person, like per front of house employee, or just in general?
In general. So, I used that example of how we manage wait times at the front door, right? If you've got your most junior person working at the front door, giving out quote times, all these people are coming at them saying, where's my table? How long is the wait? It's a pressure situation. They're not comfortable. They get stressed out. They give a bad quote time. And if one group of customers, 4 people, leave because they didn't like the quote time they heard, there's your opportunity.
Right.
4 customers a day is all it would take to get that improvement that we're looking for. So, like I said, I think I've told you this before in other conversation. I will never teach a restaurant operator, at least I don't think, anything operationally that they don't already know.
Right.
They know their business better than anybody.
Right.
But what we do show them is how to measure and how to leverage all of those things that they're working on. What happens if, right? That's where this metric and this measurement really makes an impact.
Yeah. It's kind of showing people where to look instead of, telling them they need to look at things different. Well, I guess it is look at things differently, but it's like you said, it's all stuff you already know. It's managing wait times. It's time,
Sure.
from running food, taking orders, and all of that. So, with that, I think if a restaurateur wants to work with you or, work with BenchmarkSixty, where do people come find you?
LinkedIn's the best. I mean, we spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. I think, trying to make sure that we generate relevant content and making sure we're sort of staying in front of people. That LinkedIn's the best. They can find us on our website, benchmark60.com. We're on Instagram at benchmark60. We're trying to make sure that we've got a presence everywhere, but we're really just on a mission to change the way that the restaurant industry looks at the whole labor model, because it's not just about profit. A lot of it's about employee experience, lowering turnover, lowering stress, making people want to work in this industry.
Absolutely.
It's a great place to work. It's a ton of fun as long as you're in a good environment.
I think at the end of the day, the biggest thing you can probably do is improve that employee experience, and everything else will improve from there.
Absolutely.
Well, Jim, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me, DJ. Pleasure.
Thanks again for checking out the Restaurant Growth Podcast. We're glad to have you as a listener. For more great content from 7 Shifts, check out our website and blog, 7shifts.com/blog. You can also hit us on all of the social media platforms at 7 Shifts. Thanks.